So this is welcome. This is some of you may be aware, Sierra, we've done a few of these events over the last several years. This is maybe like, I don't know, 10 or 12 or 14 different events focusing on different issues, really trying to give municipal leaders the resources to be successful, both in their own communities and also advocating for a statewide policy. So today we are going to be talking about buildings. How are we building for our future? And I'm going to jump us right in here. So just to give folks a sense of what to expect today, we are going to be talking about first the role of buildings in the Massachusetts emissions landscape. We're going to share some talking points, how you can talk about these issues with your constituents, with colleagues. We're going to have some time to chat with each other and share some challenges and opportunities in our own communities. And then we're going to close by talking about some of the opportunities and challenges at the state level as well, and how you can be part of a group of folks advocating for better building policy from the state. And we're going to try and keep this to an hour and a half. So we should be done at 4:30. We'll try and end in, try and not go over. I want to respect everyone's time this afternoon. I know you all are very busy, and I'm grateful to see you on a Sunday afternoon. So just very quickly, as we get in here, just to summarize here, if folks are able to stay on mute, that would be great. Please feel free to throw questions in the chat. We'll try and answer the questions live if possible. And if not, we will circle back to you via email after the event. Definitely want to make sure you have your questions answered. We'll have our emails at the end. So if you want to email us about something else, please do that as well. But just try and keep the questions in the chat as relevant to the discussion as possible. All right. And so, and just just a few sentences about the organization I'm part of, Sierra Club. Probably many of you know, we are a national organization. I'm part of the Massachusetts chapter. We have somewhere between 80 and 100,000 members and supporters across the state. But our staff is a very small team, only 5 people. We're really a volunteer-driven organization pushing for climate justice and clean energy advocacy. And I'll pass it to Sarah to introduce her organization.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. It's so wonderful to see you all on this Sunday afternoon. As many of you probably know, the Massachusetts Climate Action Network is an advocacy organization with about 65 chapters across the state. And our theory of change states that local change that we focus on, clean energy, renewable energy, community choice aggregation, as well as building code, can push the state to be more responsive in creating progressive, impactful climate change policies. So we really work town by town with advocates from all across the state in terms of enhancing communication, doing a lot of education events, all around reaching net zero emissions by 2050. So with that, Jacob, let's advance to the next slide. We do want to provide sort of the larger ecosystem of groups in the state that are working on what we're going to be talking about this afternoon, which is building electrification. And there are other organizations, including the Home Energy Efficiency Team, HEAT, that are really doing some interesting work. Mothers Out Front, again, a national organization that has Massachusetts community-based groups, also focused on building electrification. Alternatives for Community and Environment, ACE. This is an environmental justice organization that situates building electrification in the context of equity. The Rocky Mountain Institute, this is an institute based in Colorado, has a national scope in terms of thinking about building electrification across all of our states, has had a very strong presence in Massachusetts, working on something called the Building Electrification Accelerator Team. There are also coalitions in Massachusetts, including Mass Power Forward, of which Sierra Club and MCAM belong. And there are a whole suite of others. In other words, this topic today is a core focus of many organizations working in the climate movement across the state. Next slide, please, Jacob. So why electrify? Why are we talking about building electrification? And so that's really this first part of our presentation. Next slide, please, Jacob. And I think it's helpful to start with understanding where our emissions come from. This graph goes back to 2005, ends in 2017, really looking at the breakdown in emissions in the industrial sector, which has sort of been holding steady. But most importantly, really looking at what is happening with our buildings emissions. You know, there's been some spikes in development, so really coming out after just around 2016, those emissions begin to climb up again. While meanwhile, transportation emissions with the big push in electric vehicles has been slowly dropping. Another interesting piece in this graph is that the electricity sector has been steadily declining, and they have made amazing advances in energy efficiency programs and things like that. The big takeaway is that buildings across the state of Massachusetts are the second largest source of emissions. Next slide, please. So why is that? And so we're going to talk specifically in today's presentation on residential buildings and a little bit less so on commercial. But in terms of residential buildings, the way people in Massachusetts heat their homes, primarily over 81%, basically 82% heat their homes using fossil fuels of different kinds. You know, the legacies around burning wood, you know, that's going to continue to taper off. But, you know, electricity, in this particular graphic, it's less than 15%. So in terms of thinking about how to transform how we heat our homes, how we build our buildings, it's really useful to understand where we are starting from. And we're really starting from a place where fossil fuels dominate how people heat their homes. Next slide, please. So what exactly is that heating profile for residential buildings? And the majority of folks heat their homes with utility gas. Eversource, Ingrid, you know, over 51%. Increasingly, however, even though we do have fuel oil and kerosene at around 27%, I have heard anecdotally from developers in central and western Mass share with me that increasingly propane is being targeted as the fuel of choice for new development. So that's interesting. So that is down there in the lower left, this bottle tank liquid propane option, 3.2% in this particular graphic, but we don't want it to expand in terms of its overall piece of the pie here. And again, electricity only coming in at 15%. We really want to change the distribution of these profiles to really make sure that we have clean energy sourced for electricity. Next slide, please. So where does Massachusetts sit relative to other states in the nation in terms of their emissions, in terms of how the Commonwealth's emissions contribute nationwide to emissions? And, you know, as you might be able to predict, New York is really up there, contributing over half of their state's emissions to the national population of emissions. Massachusetts, we come in just below Texas, and their major emissions are from cooling and transportation, and just above Minnesota. And we are only above Minnesota because we have more people. We're a densely populated state, and our residential heating profile is predominantly fossil fuels. So this is the larger context, both nationally and within the state of Massachusetts, of why buildings are part of the climate problem and how we can actually transform the building sector to contribute to climate mitigation. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by climate-friendly buildings? So as we have been already talking about, most of the buildings currently are heated by some fossil fuel or some non-renewable fuel source. The language around building electrification that Sierra Club is using here today really refers to the idea that instead of using fossil fuel to heat our homes, that we can replace the infrastructure with all electric emission-free technology. So building electrification specifically refers to switching out our appliances and making sure that they are all electric. Everything from domestic hot water heaters, they gotta go and be replaced with other kinds of technologies, as well as our cook stoves. And in Massachusetts, as I've been emphasizing, buildings, they are the second largest source of our emissions. And we really can use existing policy tools, existing regulatory tools to reverse this, right? To say, actually, buildings can be a major contributor to climate mitigation. And that's what we mean by carbon neutral. So in order to fully electrify buildings, existing buildings, that we will have to do an update, a retrofit of almost 1 million homes over the next 10 years. And then after that first decade, another 1 million. This is a massive project. So when we talk about building electrification, we're talking about new construction and retrofits. But the good news is we have the technology already to do all of this work. Next slide, please. And this just goes back to my last comment. This is a two-pronged approach. We have to address new construction, and we're going to talk about that, how we're going to address that through a statewide building code process called a net zero stretch code. And then we also have to retrofit all existing buildings, not only residential, but commercial, industrial, labs, restaurants are really important, all towards getting to a fossil fuel free buildings sector. Next slide, please, Jacob. So what is the problem with gas? I grew up with gas. I loved cooking with gas. Gas, you know, for someone who cooks a lot, you can control the flame. It's really appealing, but is a huge problem. Next slide, please. So there are many aspects I'm going to touch on in the next few slides. Very broadly, natural gas has some safety risks associated with it. Explosions inside people's homes resulting in death. There are a whole suite of public health challenges, especially for folks with pre-existing asthmatic upper respiratory problems. And then again, there are those persistent carbon emissions, and we're really talking about trying to reduce carbon emissions within the building sector, and that starts in our homes. Next slide, please. So the health impacts of fossil fuels in buildings. So this was a study done by the Rocky Mountain Institute that I referred to earlier, where they looked at the air quality impacts of building emissions in Massachusetts for the year 2017. So this is a snapshot in time. And for that particular year, they calculated the number of early deaths. So the number of people that died statistically before was expected. And in the residential sector, they calculated 570 people died in the year 2017 alone. And these people lived in homes where they cooked with natural gas. And that cost the state $8.4 billion in terms of caring for these people, health insurance costs, and all the externalities associated with losing a family member, with all of that. Now, this also holds true for the commercial sector. Fewer deaths, but they still happened. So this includes restaurants. Exactly, Mr. Higgins. This includes restaurants. It comes in at a slightly lower price tag, but not insignificant, right? So $2 billion. So, and this was for 2017. So this is really important to know that cooking with natural gas kills people. It's not safe, and it costs not only families, but the Commonwealth a significant amount of money. Next slide, please, Jacob.
Hey, Sarah, I just noticed that the previous slide got skipped. I don't know if we want to go back to that. I don't know how it happened.
Oh, let's go back.
All right, hold on. There we go.
Aha, I thought we had, oh, okay, great.
Yeah,
So
it was some glitch there. Sorry about that.
Oh, not a problem at all. So we're going to talk about what are the air pollutants associated with natural gas? And this is something that I've been learning about over the past 10 years. It's something that a lot of people, we just don't know about it, but it's really crucial. And so gas appliances, including water heaters, furnaces, dryers, they all generate pollutants, airborne pollutants, that really make it tough for folks with respiratory health problems and actually can contribute, as the RMI study showed, to premature death, that early death. And so having, this may sound dramatic, but it's not, having a gas appliance in our homes is like having a small gas plant, but without any scrubber, without any pollution control. And this is kind of a very different perspective than how I was raised as somebody that loved my mom's natural gas stove. So nationwide, we're talking about across the country, these gas appliances produce 2 times more the NOx emissions. And these are super toxic emissions that lodge in the lungs, that can aggravate asthma and pre-existing respiratory ailments. So these gas appliances produce twice those emissions than the gas power plants, despite burning less gas. And we're right there cooking our chicken shawarma over the stove. So appliance pollution also disproportionately harms folks, people of color. And people of color and those communities, research has demonstrated, are exposed 2 times more to these kinds of pollution, particulate matter 2.5, which lodges in the lungs, especially in the very old and especially in the super young, from gas appliances compared to their white counterparts. Okay, and that is another layer on top of the disproportionate vulnerability that people of color have to COVID. So in terms of an environmental justice perspective, alleviating indoor air pollution is crucial. These appliances can also contribute to compromised indoor air or to indoor air pollution when there is backdrafting, when there is improper ventilation, when there is no hood above the oven, right? And this is really common in older homes that have these gas wall furnaces and in low-income rental properties. So we're not only talking about single-family homes, we're also talking about multifamily and rental units. And because of this lack of ventilation, the concentration of NOx and these other pollutants can really lead to unsafe levels of carbon monoxide, especially in these smaller homes. So we really need to increase ventilation to get a lot of this air pollution out. But, you know, that's midway downstream. Let's just get the polluting infrastructure out of our homes in general. Rachel Golden, she's now with Rocky Mountain Institute. She has a fabulous blog that addresses these dynamics of indoor air quality. And next slide, please, Jacob. So we've already done this slide, really getting clear on the health impacts now that we have this larger framing about the kinds of air pollution that is indoor air pollution that is generated by gas fired appliances. The other safety risks are associated with explosions. And for those of you that were around in 2018, there was excessive pressure in the Columbia gas lines that resulted in a series of explosions and fires in over 40 homes in Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover. And in fact, one person was killed. Over 30,000 folks were forced to evacuate their homes immediately. This doesn't happen very often, but it is a risk. And even though the Columbia Gas Company, they did reach a settlement of $80 million for these affected communities, these residents still live with the impacts of the explosions of their homes, as this image clearly demonstrates. Rebuilding, refinancing, you know, and especially losing a loved one have long-term impacts. So gas is not safe. Next slide, please. And in fact, as many of you know, gas is exacerbating the climate crisis. And from a New York Times article in 2019, new data show that natural gas is the biggest driver of emissions globally in recent years. And if we want to get to net zero emissions by 2050, which is what the Next Generation Roadmap Bill now mandates, we have to specifically address natural gas in our buildings. And part of the challenge is that gas companies connect at least one new house to gas every minute, totaling over 560,000 new gas hookups every year nationwide. So that's nationwide, but we're talking about Massachusetts. And so another challenge is that the methane emissions from gas are part of the problem. Methane is even a more potent and volatile greenhouse gas, and it is consistently underreported. So gas consumption across the United States, and these are 2018 data, show that buildings are just above industry and below power plants. So these are the three major sources: power plants, buildings, and industry for consuming gas. That's why, once again, buildings, they're part of the problem now, but they can be part of the solution. Next slide, please. I do want to talk briefly about a technology that is gaining more mention in mainstream media, like the New York Times. And this is hydrogen, although oftentimes it's put in air quotes, green hydrogen. And currently, hydrogen is used in all kinds of industrial processes. It does hold some potential for decarbonizing parts of our economy, related to energy storage, related to thinking about how to do long distance transportation for both ships and trucks. That's not part of the building sector. And then thirdly, in terms of manufacturing high heat, not part of the building sector. There have been groups like the Clean Energy Group out of Vermont, and other groups that emphasize that there are so many unresolved challenges to truly understanding hydrogen and the risks associated with it, to make it currently a viable option for the building sector. So for example, hydrogen, it's very volatile. It has a very different ignition profile. It behaves differently in fires compared to natural gas. So right now, there is not one firefighter in the state of Massachusetts that is certified to put out a hydrogen fire. And this relates to safety. It has to have its own pipeline for transport. It has to have its own trucks. They're called cryogenic tanks. It has to be stored super cold. And all of these investments in infrastructure and investments in training firefighters has not been resolved sufficiently to adequately make the case that hydrogen is part of the building sector process for building electrification. We're just not there yet. So I just wanted to mention that for folks on the call today. Next slide, please, Jacob.
And I think it's back to me now. And I didn't say it up front, but I just want to be clear how grateful I am that MCAN has agreed to partner with Sierra Club on this event, and so incredibly grateful for Sarah for lending her expertise and voice to today's presentation. But I'm going to move us along here. We're going to talk a little bit about what it means to electrify our homes and businesses, and what does a carbon neutral or net zero building actually look like? So first and foremost, some of the benefits of electrification. So we heard a minute ago about some of the downsides of gas. This is the other side of the coin. What are the benefits of electrification? And there are more than this, but this is definitely the short list here. Affordability is probably the one that comes first to mind. If you aren't paying a gas bill, that's one less utility bill to pay, which means more affordability in the long run as electricity prices continue to drop with offshore wind and additional solar coming online. That's going to mean lower monthly bills for residents. Certainly not burning gas and switching to emission-free electric heating is great for the climate crisis. I think we covered that. Likewise, Sarah, I think really did a great job talking about some of the health and air impacts of not burning fuels in your home. Maybe unintuitively, perhaps, really efficient homes are some of the most dangerous homes to burn gas in because there's not enough airflow. So ideally, we want really efficient homes that are really cheap to heat, but then are heated with emission-free, pollution-free technology. Safety, we definitely talked about that as well. Massachusetts, we have such a horrifying example of a lack of safety from 2018. Energy resilience and reliability, excuse me, a little bit of frog in my throat today. Especially if you're using on-site renewables to heat your home, like solar on your roof. If there's a big storm, you're still able to generate electricity and heat your home, and you're not reliant on gas lines or gas delivery to make sure you have heat. And lastly, local jobs. When we build new buildings, we look for solutions locally. We don't outsource our building construction to other countries for the most part. So when we are building these new net zero or carbon neutral buildings, we're really trying to grow the workforce here in Massachusetts and in New England, and that's a really big opportunity. So before I move into some of the nitty gritty here, I just want to talk for a second about equity. And I think anytime we're proposing, a change in our economy, a change the way we do business, it's really important to think about who is being impacted, and especially how the most vulnerable residents are impacted by such a change. From Sierra Club's perspective, we believe it's very important that we move low-income residents off of gas first. Otherwise, they will be saddled with the cost of a shrinking system. Basically, we anticipate that electric heating will continue to become cheaper and cheaper, and while gas heating will become more expensive. We have a climate bill right now that basically mandates us getting off of fossil fuels and moving to emission-free technology. If low-income residents are the last ones still using gas, they're be paying for all that transmission and all the infrastructure related to the gas system beyond just the cost of gas in their homes. So really making sure that those are the folks who have the benefits first is really important. And also from an equity perspective, we want those folks who have less means to have smaller bills and be able to afford their living situation. What we advocate for is for communities who are looking at pilot projects or something more expansive soon to partner with your local affordable housing, labor, and other equity groups to figure out how you can build a program in an equitable way. I think the things that we all really want to avoid are, updating a house to make it really efficient and use all clean heating technology, and then displacing the residents, either because they need their landlord kicks them out to do the upgrade, or they can't afford the rent. And like I said before, we really don't want the stranded gas assets falling on those who can least afford it. And I'll say it more on a future slide, but gas appliances have a 15 to 30 year lifespan. So really any building we're doing now, we're just locking communities into that technology for a generation into the future, essentially. All right, I'll move us along here. So when we talk about net zero building, we've given a few different definitions here. I really like this one. I'll credit Sarah for coming up with this Venn diagram. But a net zero building essentially has three legs, right? So it uses super energy efficient technology, and we've been building in Massachusetts. We've gotten national acclaim for our energy efficiency programs. We already know how to build super energy efficient buildings. We need to keep doing that and actually double down on some of the technology that many of us know very well. Things like double glazed windows and LED lights. That's the first step. But we also need to electrify our heating systems. So this could mean air source or ground source heat pumps, which work wonderfully even in cold climates like Massachusetts. It means induction or electric stoves. I feel like people love to dump on electric stoves, and that's fair. I understand where that's coming from. They do work, and they don't pollute like a gas stove. And I've had a lot of fun researching induction cooktops and heard some really exciting stories about how that technology is developing. We're not going to talk much about cooktops in this presentation, but happy to connect with folks offline and talk about cooking. And the last thing is renewable energy. Of course, we want to be building buildings that have on-site or off-site renewables, so that we can make sure that the electricity we're using is not coming from a fossil fuel source as well. And so I think then the short definition here, it's very simple. We want a building that is using very little carbon to operate, and also what low carbon is using is being offset by a renewable generation. Ideally, a building will also be built with very low embodied carbon. So thinking about the building materials that we're using. Sarah, I guess I was going to toss it to you for just like a minute here if you wanted to say a few words about embodied carbon.
Great, thanks, Jacob. So embodied carbon is gaining a lot of traction in the building and design fields as something to include in our conceptualization of a net zero building. So as Jacob mentioned, the very first thing to do is to make sure that if we want a building to be truly net zero, to really maximize the structural efficiency, to make sure that building envelope is tight. And in doing that, really focusing on using, if it's a concrete building, low carbon concrete mixes. There's a lot of work happening right now in that area. Limit the use of carbon intensive materials. And there's a long list if folks are interested that I can send you about what those materials are. More importantly, reuse existing materials. Choose materials that have lower carbon involved in its sourcing and its production, and minimize the waste. So it's really trying to recycle, reuse, and minimize waste, but all starts at really maximizing the structural efficiency of a building.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Sarah is definitely, by comparison to me, the expert on embodied carbon, further along the learning curve, certainly. And so I'm going to very briefly show this video. I'm assuming this will be review for some folks, but it's just about a minute and a half. A question I often get is, how does this technology actually work? So hopefully this very, very short video will answer those questions. If you all bear with me 1 second here.
Heating and cooling your home accounts for more than 50% of the average monthly utility bill, so it's important to make smart choices when considering a new heating and cooling system. A heat pump is the most efficient heating and cooling system available today. That's because rather than generating heat, a heat pump simply transfers heat from one place to another, a much more efficient use of electricity. Here's how it works. A typical air source heat pump has an outdoor unit containing a compressor and condenser that work in conjunction with your indoor air handling unit. In the warmer months, a heat pump pulls heat from inside your home and transfers it outside, cooling your home much like an air conditioner would. In the cooler months, it reverses the process and extracts heat from the outside air and transfers that heat into your home. Even on cold days, the air contains enough heat to warm your home. However, on extremely cold days, a heat pump has an electric resistance heating element which can be used to provide auxiliary heat. In addition to the air source heat pump we've reviewed, geothermal and groundwater heat pumps use similar technology. All work under the same principle of transferring heat rather than generating heat. It requires less electricity and saves you money. Smart energy, smart choices.
You all get the picture with that. It's a Mississippi Power video. I'm sure I don't agree with some of the other work Mississippi Power is doing, but it's a great heat pump explainer. So I'm going to move on. Hopefully that answered any lingering questions folks had about the technology. I want to also be clear that the sales of heat pumps have been increasing year after year. And I believe in 2020 was the first year that heat pump sales actually exceeded gas furnace sales. So that the trend is absolutely there. The technology continues to improve, and the number of businesses who specialize in heat pump technology are also increasing. Easier and easier to get maintenance and get good installation or contractors. And so what does a energy efficient net zero home look like? It looks kind of like this, a lot like a normal home, but with tight air sealing around the windows and doors, Energy Star windows, LED or Energy Star lighting, great insulation in the attic and in the basement, high efficiency appliances. So that could be your heater, as well as your washing machine, dryer, fridge, stove, and all that. And the last piece of the puzzle is renewables. So ideally on your roof, but perhaps on a different roof, and you're able to draw power from a neighbor community solar farm or something similar. So, and some of the challenges, we want to be really honest about the challenges here, because there are quite a few, and they're different for new construction than building retrofits. So in the case of new construction, the biggest challenge right now is cost. And in some cases, the cost differential to build super efficient net zero buildings is almost identical to building a more traditional building. In some cases, it could be as high as 7 or 8%. And the average payback period is about 12 years. But in many cases, it's much better than that. And as the trend has been increasing year to year as the technology improves. But creating opportunities for folks to get access to financing to do this type of building is really important, and something we're going to continue to advocate for at the state level. It's also important to factor in some like the non-financial benefits of our carbon neutral building, which we've talked about quite extensively. There's also a time of transition we're expecting where electricity bills may actually increase before they go down. And we want to really be careful and mindful that we are not having any undue impacts on our most vulnerable residents. And as I'll say a little bit more about this in a moment, but the workforce is still developing around this. And in many ways, this technology is still new. So compared to certainly gas or oil heating, which has been around much longer, there is still limited expertise in some areas, although it's growing year after year. And then by comparison, very similar challenges for building retrofits, a little different. So in terms of our current housing stock in Massachusetts, it's very old. I've lived in many, many years in a leaky 100-year-old apartment. And those are going to be some of the hardest buildings to retrofit, because not only do you need to replace the infrastructure and outdated wiring, but it's going to be very hard to make those buildings efficient again. So again, I think the secret there is we should focus on the folks who are in most dire need first. I mentioned the lifespan of fossil fuel heating appliances, which is 15 to 30 years. Basically, that means that anything that's built, anything that's built essentially now, but certainly by 2030, will still be in operation by 2050 when we know we need to transition away from fossil fuels entirely. We talked about the workforce a minute ago. And I'll also say that in environmental justice or low-income communities, these issues are often compounded. So the housing stock in many cases is of poorer quality. There's already higher pollution and utility burden. So there are definitely communities that face a higher challenge in all regards to retrofitting their buildings. I'm also going to speak very briefly here about some of the opposition to building electrification. Groups like the Mass Petroleum Council have publicly praised climate goals, but the sentence got cut off, continue to lobby for fossil fuel policies. And we saw recently groups like NIOP and other developers speak in favor of the recent climate bill, but against some of the provisions around buildings. And in many states other than Massachusetts, Republicans are acting proactively to pass laws to prevent transition away from gas in the future. And again, in New England here, Eversource provides a very important service of making sure we have power and heat in our homes. But their business model in many ways is built around making sure that we continue to heat our homes and businesses with gas. And there was a very scandalous slideshow that was leaked a few months ago, folks may have seen in the news, where they were very clear about their intention to take advantage of some of the fear around power outages, and also that, quote unquote, fossil fuels are natural gas, fossil fuel is in the fight for its life. This is a screenshot from the slideshow. So I share this because, as municipal leaders, you're going to be hearing from constituents and from the industry with very similar talking points. And we want you to be prepared to push back both around cost and reliability. And the next slide here, I know I'm skipping right through this. The next slide here, these are some of the common talking points we've been hearing nationally from the gas industry: reliability, resilience, speed, and comfort. I'm not going to read through this, but I'm going to share this slideshow at the end, and please feel free to refer back to it for talking points. In many cases, gas is not more reliable or more resilient. And in many cases, the electric option actually is better. Especially in areas, especially in homes where there is access to on-site renewables. It's much more resilient for big storms, for natural disasters, and other things. We're just a few minutes behind where I like to be on time. So I'm going to skip this right along and give this a little bit short shrift. But please refer back to this. I'm going to switch gears and talk about Massachusetts very specifically. And I'll just invite folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try and respond to them live. It's been crickets from you all, which maybe means you're having a wonderful time, but if you have questions, please feel free to throw them in. So speaking quickly about Massachusetts, very specifically, some of the policies here, folks probably are likely familiar with some or all of the current laws that are affecting our building emissions. So of course, in 2008, we passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, which set the first baseline emission standards for Massachusetts. Of course, we expanded on those standards this year with a next generation roadmap. And I'm sure many of you belong to green community towns. The Green Communities Act in 2008 created some of the very first energy efficiency and incentive programs. Many communities have taken advantage of. It's lauded as one of the most successful programs in the country. We're pushing to expand that and make some of the incentives specifically around electrification as well. And then speaking again to the next generation roadmap. So a lot of our policy goals, I should say, in the next few years are going to kind of result from the passage of this law. This did a few really important things, including the emissions targets I just mentioned. We now are going to have emissions targets, for the 2030, 2040, 2050, as well as some interim targets by sector, which is really important. There'll be individual targets for the building sector specifically, which they have yet to be decided. We'll talk more about that at the end. And then very critically, the bill also established the creation of a high performance building code. That is going to be critical for communities that want to move away from gas towards better buildings in the next couple of years. And Sarah, am I tossing this one to you? I forget where the transition is here. I think it's here.
Great, thank you, Jacob. So I think what's interesting, what happened with the negotiations between Governor Baker and the legislators around the climate bill, in some ways focused on the building code provision in the bill. And I just want to offer kind of a broader context for why building codes can be really powerful for affecting change in the building sector. And so right now in Massachusetts, we have two existing codes. The first, the base code, which is the floor. And, you know, if you see maybe you can't see my cursor because I'm not sharing my screen, but it is the black floor of this black, green, blue building. You know, and this provides, the base code covers the minimum requirements for all new buildings related to safety and things like that. Then there is a code, the current stretch code, that basically operates as the ceiling. And if you're a green community, you probably have a stretch code where you can adopt a more stringent code that has additional requirements for energy efficiency. So in Massachusetts, the challenge has been, you know, our base code, which is the floor, and our stretch code, which in theory is supposed to be the ceiling, because we've updated the base code, right? Now we're looking at the floor is above the ceiling in terms of the actual code, the existing code language. So that means a couple of different things. And part of the climate bill specifically made reference, as Jacob referred to, the high energy performance building code. So this would be a third code. This is sort of confusing, but hang in there. That would be an opt-in for all communities. And if you're a green community and you don't opt in, you don't lose your green community funding. So the spirit of what's in the climate bill related to the net zero stretch code is that there's some flexibility in the process for opting in. And as a net zero building code, it's going to expand that ceiling. So it's going to reverse that relationship between the base, the floor, and the ceiling, so that the floor is actually the floor, the base code is the base code now, and the net zero stretch code is going to have increased emphasis, as we've been talking about, on efficiency, on electrification, and flexibility around where that renewable energy piece is procured, whether it's on-site or purchased off-site. And so over time, there is a process over time for continuing to update and align and reduce these building codes back down to 2. So next slide, Jacob. Aha. So we do want to emphasize that there are a lot of voluntary certification programs out there. You know, there's LEED, leadership in, oh my goodness, leadership in environmental and energy design. Maybe I have that reversed. This is voluntary. There's Zero Code. There's the Living Building Challenge. But with all of these, many of them do not really pivot buildings to be fossil fuel free. And that's really what we're trying to do with the net zero stretch code, with building electrification, so that we really want to emphasize that these certification programs exist. They can be useful, especially for marketing purposes. But at the end of the day, the biggest, more powerful way to push for a statewide approach to building electrification is through a net zero stretch code process that focuses on embodied carbon, operational carbon, and integrates where buildings, both commercial and residential, can get their renewable energy. Next slide, please, Jacob.
I think this one's back to me.
Correct.
So I'm just going to talk about a little, for a second, where Massachusetts fits into the broader scheme nationally. And I think this is actually, I find this really interesting. Massachusetts is one of the states that's actually leading on these policies nationally. A lot of states are simultaneously trying to figure out how we change our building sector. And Massachusetts is one of them. California, other New England states, Pennsylvania, DC, a couple others are definitely all working through some of the same challenges as we are. I think Massachusetts has a really unique role, though, because we are a slightly colder climate state, because we have so many of our buildings are heated by gas. Some of the policies and local solutions that we pursue are going to be mimicked in other communities across the country and possibly in other countries as well. I just want to share that this is some smattering of news coverage from across the country, but just that this idea is gaining steam quickly and will continue to be part of the national policy conversation, I would say increasingly so in moving into the current decade. In terms of just some specific examples of other states, I won't run through these in detail, but this is all policies that have happened in, policies that have passed in the last 2 years in California, Colorado, and Connecticut. Both the Colorado and the Connecticut example were this year, in fact. States are right now, there's a few different things we're seeing at the state level. States are seeking to get a better sense of where their building emissions are at, measuring how much their buildings are producing, especially commercial buildings. We're also seeing states like Connecticut establish pilot programs for energy efficiency and weatherization, and creating funding streams for communities to take advantage of these programs and bring some of those benefits to their residents. So it's really interesting. Massachusetts has many pending bills that we won't have time to talk about today, which do a whole wide variety of things. So I just want folks to be aware this is out there. And Gordon, to your question in the chat, we will cover the timetable for the high performance code development before we close today. And Sarah, I really appreciate the quick answer in the chat as well. But we'll talk about, that's one of the last things we're going to talk about today. So we have about 30 minutes left. I think we're going to try and spend maybe the next, 15 or so minutes in breakout rooms, though. I really want to give folks a chance to chat with each other. One piece of feedback that we got from past similar events is that folks just really want a chance to kind of explore and talk about these ideas together. We've thrown some prompts here that I love folks to take a look at around what are the challenges you foresee in your community, what are some of the opportunities, and what state policies would be helpful and what tools can we provide. But if folks want to go for a slightly different direction in their breakout rooms, we're fine with that. We really want to make the space about you all who are doing the work on the ground in your communities. So I'm going to break us into 3 groups. Myself, Sarah, and our Sarah intern, Corinne, will be there to help just facilitate, but I'm going to leave, I think, the conversation up to these groups, and we'll come back and maybe report out 1 or 2 really bright ideas from those breakout rooms in the next few minutes. And we'll come back here, let's see, at about 4:12. So give me just 1 second here to the breakout rooms. And I feel like I need to play like some, what do you call it? Hold music. Will I do this? All right, let's see here. All right, so I'm going to open up the rooms and we're going to be here, for about 10 or 15 minutes. All right, I think we have everyone back. That wasn't nearly enough time. It never is. I'm hoping that next time we can do this in person and we can devote the majority of the time to some opportunities to dig into stuff. Zoom is not conducive to that kind of collaboration, unfortunately. So we only have a few more slides today. And before we get into that, I'd love if folks maybe just two people want to come off mute and share something that they heard in their group that really was interesting or resonated with them, or something they want to maybe learn more about? I don't want to share anything. Or maybe something that they're like dying to tell everybody about, something in their community.
I just wanted to mention something. We have a meeting with our national grid representatives basically annually with our energy advisory committee. Last year when we talked to them, they were no on electrification. Gas is just as good. This year when we talked to them, which was last week, they said we're moving to electrification of everything, which was a good sign. They told us that they're removing rebates for gas and oil systems renewals, and they're putting their money into electric heat pumps and more for low income. So that seemed to be all good news. I don't know what the official story is, but that's what our reps told us.
Seems like good news and a good place to keep pushing.
Yeah.
So I'll share that we had a meeting a few months back on our home rule petition for full electrification with a gas company industry representative. And it was a very, odd meeting, as you can imagine. He was trying to explain how the gas company employs so many people, and that electricity will never be able to provide enough bandwidth or to power all electric vehicles, and we should really get behind gas. So to the city that has the most number of gas leaks in the state and the most number of pipes that are over 100 years old. So yeah, something I should share with the greater group. I'll share it to you and you can send it out. It's definitely worth watching.
Thank you so much. That's a couple of great anecdotes. I would love to just keep this conversation going. I'm actually like dying internally that we don't have time to dig into it all, but we'll share out notes from this meeting. And as you will see momentarily, this meeting is intended to be kind of like a jumping off point, or one of many jumping off points for a greater conversation. So we're really hoping that, we can work with you all to advocate for some, really excellent state policy, and also be a resource moving forward. So I'm just gonna, we only have about 5 more minutes worth of slides here, and I'm gonna zip right through them and let you get back to your Sunday. But I just want to name some things that as Sierra Club and as MCAN we see as coming up in the future. I'm actually not going to talk going to talk much about municipal action. It sounds like some of you all are doing some awesome work around school buildings as well. I heard the MSBA mentioned as a place where we can continue to push for better standards and support around high efficiency school buildings. But in addition to that, so you're all, I think, often know what's best in your communities, places to push. But some of the, broadly speaking, some of the things we advocate for are incentive programs. Heat Smart isn't something the state provides any support for anymore, but we've still seen communities toy around with doing bulk purchasing programs for heat pumps for residents. Other programs to encourage carbon neutral construction. I know Newton and Cambridge and Arlington are doing some, and Brookline are doing some really creative things to try and encourage a higher standard of fossil-free construction. So I just want to encourage folks to play around with that. If folks want to be in touch with people in communities that are playing around the sandbox, I'm happy to make that introduction. I know there are some folks here on the call who are really engaging in that. And then the other thing is I really, encourage folks to, think about how to minimize the cost of this transition to low income residents. And we'll really be leaning on some of, I think, your expertise about, how we can make sure that utility bills aren't highest for folks who can least afford it at the same time. If you are a community choice energy town, or you have a municipal light plant, you think you potentially have quite a bit of control over electricity rates, certainly more so than most communities. So there's kind of a built-in mechanism there that I, again, encourage folks to play around with, and, hopefully we'll have some best practices to share at a future event. this is so much more I could talk about. I'm giving incredibly short shrift, but I really want to hear what folks are doing in their communities. These are just a smattering of examples. I'm going to spend just a minute now talking about statewide advocacy. So this was kind of one of the intentions behind convening this event today. Is because we see a number of opportunities coming up at the state level where your voices are going to be really helpful, whether you're a city councilor or a select board member or on an energy committee or a staff member. Municipal voice is going to be heard loud and clear around the building code process we mentioned to create a net zero stretch code. As well as the update to the Mass Save 3-year plan, which some of you are probably already aware of is ongoing. We are continuing to offer input into that process to make it a more equitable program, as well as one that does not incentivize any future fossil fuel does not incentivize fossil fuels in the future. And there's a bunch of other regulatory processes happening. I'll mention very quickly in a second here. So this is that timeline that I promised I'd share. This part of the slide is directly from DOER that shows the timeline for public comment coming up this fall. So I'm really hoping that we can come back to you all in a couple months and recruit you all to offer comments for a very strong stretch code. The devil is absolutely in the details here, and what the final promulgated code will be determined heavily by what kind of input the state is receiving, especially from municipalities, because y'all are the folks who are going to have to implement this. So we know there'll be at least 5 public hearings. We'll be looking for local leaders to weigh in and testify, or to sign on to a letter that has yet to be written in support of a strong stretch code. So here's the timeline, and of course, we'll be coming back to you before too long, talking about adopting this code. But this is I think one of the most important things we see coming up, where again your voices are going to be so unbelievably important. And then secondly, I have I hope to have it today. I don't have it today, but I'm hoping I'll have it maybe next week. In terms of the Mass Save 3-year plan, we are working with the Green Justice Coalition and Clean Water Action on a sign-on letter for municipal leaders to advocate for metrics for how Mass Save is serving historically underrepresented communities. We haven't really had good data on that, and the anecdotal data we do have is that Mass Save typically serves middle or upper class white communities more often than not. So getting that data is the first step to a more equitable rollout of these incentives. But we also want to make sure that we're not incentivizing fossil fuels, and this is a ongoing conversation as well. So stay tuned. We're going to have a silent letter we'll share with you all. When it comes out, feel free to crib for talking points if you want to use it. If you just want to sign on, send it around your community, that will be helpful as well. But again, municipal voices are so important here. I don't think I have time to get into this too much here, but a few other things that are coming up. There's the Governor's Clean Energy and Climate Plan, which will be essentially the implementation of many parts of the climate roadmap bill. We're expecting public meetings this fall or winter around the 2025 and 2030 emissions targets. So essentially, Sierra Club and our allies, MCAN and others, will be trying to hold the administration's feet to the fire and make sure that those emissions targets are strong but attainable, especially around the building sector. I don't have time, I think, to get into the 2080 DPU docket, but this is essentially an ongoing process, an ongoing regulatory process around a planned transition off of gas. Sierra Club and many of our allies are stakeholders, as are utilities. We're looking for some creative ways as well to move away from gas heating. Folks may be familiar with the geothermal microdistricts proposal, championed by HEAT, essentially using some of the same gas pipes, but instead of using them for gas, using them for hot water thermal heating, so networked geothermal heating. Super cool idea. I think there is a bill around it as well to try and scale that out. Eversource has already agreed to do a pilot. But if you're interested in digging into the weeds, this is a great place to do it. And I'm happy to connect you with some folks who are working in the docket. And this is our last slide today. I promised I'd have you all out of here by 4:30. I'm trying to keep to that promise. So please stay tuned. We will send all these slides as well as some links and notes in a follow-up email early next week. Stay tuned for that sign-on letter I promised around the Mass Save plan. We'll also reach back out to you. I hope it's okay. If it's not, let me know. Around the net zero stretch code hearings coming up, we'll be asking folks to testify, sign on in support of a strong stretch code, similar with the clean energy and climate plan public meetings. So enjoy your August, because it looks like it's going to be a very busy fall. We're very excited to weigh in. I also want to very quickly plug our allies at Built Environment Plus. They did a really awesome event in June. I'm betting some of you were there as well, where they got deep into some of these green building issues. They had a summit. You can watch the recording. It's linked here. It's really fascinating to hear from some other local leaders, including Mayor Curtoni in Somerville, talk about how implementing some of the stuff has gone for the city. They're also going to be releasing a summary report from that event shortly, I think in the next couple of weeks, and I'd love to pass that on to you all as well. It should offer some really great insight from communities that are engaging in this work pretty deeply. And then one final plug. I want to offer that Sierra will be offering a different kind of event around the vehicle sector, decarbonizing the heavy and medium duty, what do you call it? I guess the medium heavy duty vehicle sector. I guess that's what it's called. I'm not the transportation person. My colleague Vina will be leading that event. It hasn't been scheduled yet, but will likely be in early September. So just something to look forward to if you want to learn about how we're getting to how we're transitioning away from fossil fuels for our large trucks. It's definitely an ongoing conversation, and Vina is extremely knowledgeable. So just stay tuned for info about that. We'll send an email around. I want to also offer, Sarah, if you had any closing comments that you want to offer, I'm so grateful for you being on the call with us.
Oh, well, thanks, Jacob. I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for giving up an hour and a half of their Sunday. I want to reiterate that what in the breakout room I was part of, there are a couple of key things I think moving forward that are going to be so important to address. One of them is the historic preservation piece around making sure buildings can be truly net zero. And then also the other piece is really addressing the demand for deep energy retrofits. So again, this is like a two-pronged approach, new construction and deep energy retrofits. And so I just wanted to emphasize that the DOER process for the net zero stretch code starting in the fall is one place to focus on new construction. And then in our follow-up materials to all of you, we're going to include some information on some current legislation that addresses deep energy retrofits. So there's a lot of material coming your way. And Caroline, I am also super interested in this progressive municipal group. So I'll be reaching out with you. And Jessica from Methuen, I would love to get on the phone with you and talk about reduced valuation of all electric homes in terms of next steps. So thank you all. Thanks, Jacob and Corinne. Have a fabulous Sunday, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.